In this video, we are going to solve this exercise. The first question says, write a function by your choice that accepts a callback function. So let's go ahead and write one. We'll create a function named outer that accepts a callback function. And here, whatever getting returned from callback function is what I'm returning from this outer function. So when you're calling outer function, you will be passing a callback function, and that will be a function definition. I can name it inner that accepts a num and returns num plus 1. And here when I'm calling the callback function, I'll pass 21. So this is an example of it. Similarly, let's go ahead and go to the second question that says create a function by your choice that returns a function reference. So here we should not be accepting this function. Rather than that, I'll just define this function right here that is called inner, and what I'm returning is the inner function. So this becomes two different ways of defining a higher order function. One either accepts a callback or returns a callback. Moving on to next, create a higher order function called map that takes two input, an array of numbers, string, booleans, etc., and a callback function, a function that is applied to each element of the array inside the function map. So have map return all these things. So this is very similar to write. This is exactly what we need to write. So in this case, we need to write implementation of map function. So we need to write a function called myMap. So we need to write a function called map that accepts two parameters. Let's start with the first one. So it accepts an array and a callback function. Moving on here, a callback function, a function that is applied to each element. So for that, we'll say for of loop. So we'll say let element of array, and for each element, what I need to do is call the callback function with the value of element, whatever getting returned. So here it says that it have map return a new array filled with the value that are the result of the callback function on each element of the input array. So whatever getting returned, I'm just going to push it into array named final, and we'll say final dot push. And once it is done, at last, all I need to do is to return final. So this is the map function we were supposed to write. So let's go ahead and test it. We also need to write this function multiply by 2. So I'll just go ahead and write this function multiplied by 2 that accepts a num and returns num multiplied by 2. So let's go ahead and define this function here. So we defined both the functions. Let's go ahead and test it. So map, we are passing an array, and return what we are getting is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, because here the function we passed was multiply by 2. Moving on to next, we see create a higher order function called forEach that takes an array and a callback and runs the callback on each element of the array. forEach does not return anything. So again, we are going to write a function forEach that is going to accept an array and a callback. And what we need to do the same thing that we did here. For loop, we just don't have to push it anywhere. We just have to call the callback with the element. Once it is done, we can test the code here. Let's go ahead and test it. Now the value of alphabet is ABCD, and that we can see it here. So for each element, you have to call this function, and calling this function is adding ABCD, all these elements, to the alphabet, and at last we are printing the alphabet. We have to write a function named filter. So we'll create a function filter that accepts an array and a callback function. And here, what we need to do is loop over the element similar to what we did it here. The only difference is if it returns a truthy value, the callback returns a truthy value, we have to push it into final array. So we'll say let final is equal to empty, and we'll not push everything. We'll just say if callback and you pass the element, this returns a truthy value, then you have to push the element inside final. So we'll say final dot push the element, and at last we'll return the final. So let's go ahead, test this whole code. Refresh this here, paste it. Here is a syntax error. So we'll fix that. We are missing the closing brackets for array. Press enter. So once we are done with that, we'll go ahead and test this code. Copy it, paste it here, press enter, and we can see console log odd. Here we are seeing only values 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9. All these values are odd, and here we have even number. So we are using filter on both these things, and it is working properly. So in this way we completed this exercise.